In the year 1838, soldiers entered Cherokee lands across the American South. Families woke up to shouting, gunfire, and fear. Doors were kicked open. People were forced outside with almost no warning. Some mothers grabbed children in panic. Some elders begged for more time. But the soldiers had orders from the United States government. The Cherokee people were being removed from their homeland. Among the frightened families was a young Cherokee boy named Atsi. He was around 12 years old. He lived with his mother, father, younger sister, and grandmother near the mountains of Georgia. His family had farmed that land for years. They raised corn, kept chickens, and lived in a wooden cabin built by his father and uncles. Atsi loved the rivers and forests around his home. His grandmother often told stories beside the fire at night. She spoke about Cherokee traditions and ancestors. She warned the children never to forget who they were, even when the world around them changed. For years, white settlers had pushed deeper into Cherokee territory. Everything became worse after gold was discovered in Georgia in 1828. Thousands of outsiders rushed into Cherokee lands. They wanted wealth, they wanted farms, and many politicians wanted native land opened for white settlement. Then came the Indian Removal Act in 1830. President Andrew Jackson strongly supported the policy. The government claimed native tribes would move west peacefully. But many Cherokee leaders knew the truth. Removal meant losing everything. The Cherokee Nation fought through American courts for years. One major leader, John Ross, tried desperately to stop removal legally. The Cherokee even won support from the Supreme Court in Worcester v. Georgia. But the government ignored the ruling. Now the soldiers had arrived, and families like Atsi's were trapped. That morning in 1838, soldiers ordered Atsi's family out of their home immediately. His mother tried gathering blankets and food. A soldier shouted at her to move faster. His little sister began crying loudly. His grandmother held her tightly while whispering Cherokee prayers. Atsi looked back at the cabin one last time. He knew something terrible was happening, but he did not yet understand they would never truly return. The family was marched with many others toward a nearby stockade camp. The camp was surrounded by fences and guarded by soldiers. Hundreds of Cherokee people were already there. Some families sat on the ground silently. Others cried openly. Children searched for missing relatives. The smell of sickness spread through the crowded camp quickly. Water was dirty, food was limited, and fear covered everything. At night, Atsi listened to adults whispering around small fires. Some blamed the government. Others blamed the treaty that had forced removal. Atsi heard the name Major Ridge spoken angrily by some men. Others warned there would be more death ahead. One elderly man said the soldiers planned to march them west like prisoners. Atsi's father tried remaining calm for the family, but Atsi noticed fear in his eyes for the first time. Weeks passed inside the camp. More Cherokee groups arrived constantly. Disease spread faster every day. Some people developed fevers. Others coughed badly through the night. One morning, Atsi saw soldiers carrying away the body of an old woman wrapped in cloth. Nobody spoke as they watched. Death was slowly becoming normal. Then the journey began. Groups of Cherokee families were ordered westward under military supervision. Some rode in wagons, most walked. The journey stretched for hundreds of miles, across rivers, across forests, across muddy roads. toward lands most had never seen. The removal would later become known as the Trail of Tears, but for the people walking it, it was simply survival. Atsi's group traveled during cold weather. Rain soaked clothing and blankets. The roads became thick with mud. His younger sister became weak quickly. She complained constantly about pain in her feet. Their mother carried her whenever possible. But the journey exhausted everyone. Food rations were small. Some days, families received spoiled meat or old cornmeal. Hunger followed the travelers constantly. At night, Cherokee families camped beside roads or rivers. Many had little protection from the cold. Children huddled together beneath blankets. Elders shivered through freezing nights. Atsi often stayed awake, listening to coughing from nearby camps. The sound never seemed to stop. One evening, his grandmother pulled him close beside the fire. She told him something important. "You must remember who you are," she whispered, "no matter what happens." Atsi nodded quietly. Then she taught him an old Cherokee song, softly, so soldiers would not hear. That song stayed in his memory forever. As the march continued, sickness spread worse through the travelers. Measles, pneumonia, dysentery. People collapsed beside the road almost daily. One afternoon, Atsi's grandmother became too weak to walk. His father and uncle supported her between them for hours, but eventually she could barely breathe. The family stopped beside a frozen field while other groups continued forward slowly. Atsi sat beside his grandmother while snow fell around them. She placed her hand against his face gently. Then she spoke her final words to him. "Do not let them erase us." Before sunrise, she died. Atsi's mother cried quietly, while his father dug a grave into hard, frozen ground. There was little time. Soldiers ordered the group forward again quickly. The family left the burial place behind without ceremony. Atsi looked back repeatedly as they walked away. He felt something inside him break. The trail became even harder after that. His father grew weaker from exhaustion. His sister developed a fever, and many Cherokee people began losing hope completely. Some no longer spoke at all. But Atsi remembered his grandmother's words every day. "Do not let them erase us." Those words became stronger inside him with every mile westward. Weeks later, the travelers crossed the Mississippi River during dangerous winter weather. Ice floated through the water. Cold wind cut through blankets and clothing. Several wagons nearly tipped, crossing muddy banks. Children screamed in fear. Atsi helped hold his sister tightly, while their parents struggled beside the wagon. By now, many families had lost relatives. Some lost parents, others lost children. Death followed the march constantly. Yet even during terrible suffering, Cherokee people continued helping one another. Women shared food with strangers. Men carried elderly travelers who could not walk. Families prayed together around fires, and elders still told stories to children whenever possible. These moments kept many people alive emotionally. One night, Atsi met another Cherokee boy near his age named Galilahi. The boy had lost both parents during the journey. Now he traveled alone with distant relatives. The two boys began walking together often. Sometimes they spoke about home quietly, about rivers, mountains, and the sound of birds back in Georgia. They feared forgetting those memories someday. As winter deepened, the journey pushed farther west, and ahead of them waited a new land, and a future none of them could yet imagine. The Cherokee travelers finally reached Indian Territory in early 1839. But the suffering did not end when the walking stopped. For many families, The real pain was only beginning. Atsi stood beside his parents and stared across the unfamiliar land in silence. There were no mountains like Georgia, no forests that felt like home, no graves of ancestors nearby, only open land, scattered camps, and exhausted Cherokee survivors trying to rebuild their lives from nothing. The government had promised houses, supplies, and support, but much of it never arrived properly. Food was limited, many shelters were unfinished, and disease still spread through crowded camps. People who survived the journey continued dying even after arrival. Atsi's little sister remained weak from fever. His mother spent nights placing cold cloths against her forehead while praying softly. His father worked every day building temporary shelters with other Cherokee men. Everyone looked exhausted. Everyone carried grief. Everywhere Atsi walked, he heard stories about people lost on the trail. A mother searching for her missing son. A grandfather buried beside a frozen river. A child who never woke up one morning. The Cherokee Nation had survived removal physically, but emotionally, it felt shattered. One evening, Atsi overheard angry men arguing near a fire. They spoke about the Treaty of New Echota. Many blamed the leaders who signed it for the disaster. One name was repeated constantly: Major Ridge. Some called him a traitor. Others argued he believed removal could not be stopped. The arguments grew dangerous. The Cherokee people were now divided deeply among themselves. Atsi's father tried avoiding political discussions. He only cared about keeping his family alive. But tensions spread through the camps daily. Some families feared violence would erupt. Others feared the Cherokee Nation itself might collapse completely after removal. Despite the pain, leaders worked desperately to rebuild. John Ross continued helping organize the Cherokee government again. Courts reopened slowly. Community meetings returned. Families tried planting crops. The Cherokee people refused to disappear. That determination mattered deeply. Work was hard. The soil felt unfamiliar, and the weather seemed strange compared to Georgia. But his father said something important one afternoon. If we stop building, then the trail wins. Atsi never forgot those words. At night, his mother sometimes cried quietly while holding his little sister. She missed home deeply. She missed the rivers, the mountains, her mother's grave. Sometimes she spoke about Georgia as if it were a dream already disappearing. That frightened Atsi. He feared forgetting, too. So he began collecting memories carefully inside his mind. The smell of smoke from their old cabin, the sound of birds near the creek, the stories his grandmother told beside the fire, and the Cherokee song she whispered before dying. He repeated that song quietly to himself often. One morning, Atsi met his friend Galilahi again near the river. The other boy looked thinner than before. His distant relatives had little food left. Atsi secretly shared part of his family's cornmeal with him. Galilahi smiled weakly. Then he asked something quietly. "Do you think we will ever go home?" Atsi did not know how to answer, because deep inside, he already understood the truth. Home was gone. Meanwhile, political anger inside the Cherokee Nation, news spread quickly across the settlements. Major Ridge had been killed. So had his son, John Ridge. Another treaty supporter, Elias Boudinot, was also murdered. The killings shocked many Cherokee families badly. Some believed justice had been served. Others feared the violence would destroy the nation completely. Atsi's father looked deeply troubled after hearing the news. "We have lost too much already," he said quietly. The boy could see exhaustion in his father's face constantly now. Not only physical exhaustion, emotional exhaustion too. The Trail of Tears had changed everyone. Children who once laughed freely now spoke softly. Parents watched the future with fear. Elders carried memories too painful to explain. Still, life slowly continued. Summer arrived. Corn began growing in small fields. New cabins were built, and Cherokee families tried rebuilding community traditions. One evening, elders gathered children together beside a fire. They told old Cherokee stories again. Stories about ancestors, animals, and sacred lessons passed through generations. Atsi listened carefully. For the first time since leaving Georgia, he felt something warm inside him again. Not happiness exactly, but connection. The stories reminded everyone who they were. That mattered more than ever now, because many Cherokee feared younger generations would slowly lose their identity after removal. American missionaries had already started arriving in some areas. Government agents pushed schools teaching English ways, and pressure to abandon Cherokee traditions kept growing. Atsi's mother worried constantly about this. One night she held both children close beside the fire. "You must remember our language," she whispered. "You must remember our stories." Her voice sounded almost desperate. As months passed, Atsi grew stronger physically. He worked beside adults more often now, cutting wood, carrying water, helping repair fences. Childhood seemed to disappear quickly after the Trail of Tears. Most children matured fast because survival demanded it. But sometimes, late at night, Atsi still dreamed about Georgia. He dreamed about his grandmother singing softly, about green mountains and rivers. Then he would wake up inside the unfamiliar Oklahoma darkness, feeling empty again. One cold evening during winter, his little sister finally asked the question nobody wanted to answer. "Why did they make us leave?" The campfire became silent. His father stared into the flames for a long time before speaking. "Because they wanted our land." Nothing more was said after that. The answer was simple and painful. Years later, Atsi would remember that moment clearly, because he finally understood something important. The Trail of Tears was not caused by nature, not by accident, not by fate. It happened because powerful people made choices. Choices driven by greed, politics, and expansion. And thousands of innocent Cherokee families paid the price. Still, even after everything, the Cherokee people survived. And Atsi began realizing survival itself could become a form of resistance. Years passed slowly in Indian territory. The wounds from the Trail of Tears never fully disappeared. But Cherokee families continued rebuilding their lives piece by piece. Atsi was no longer the frightened 12-year-old boy who left Georgia. Now he was becoming a young man. His shoulders had grown stronger from years of hard work. His voice had deepened, and the sadness inside him had changed into something quieter, but heavier. Everywhere around him, the Cherokee nation continued rebuilding from destruction. New homes stood where empty camps once existed. Fields of corn stretched across parts of the land. Schools reopened. Community councils returned. And Cherokee leaders worked hard to protect their government and traditions. At the center of much of this effort remained John Ross. Many Cherokee people still respected him deeply because he fought against removal for years. Even after the Trail of Tears, he continued helping the nation recover. But life remained difficult. Many families still struggled with hunger and poverty. Disease continued spreading through settlements from time to time, and emotional grief lingered everywhere. Some elders refused speaking about Georgia because the memories hurt too much. Others spoke about it constantly because they feared younger generations would forget. Atsi understood that fear deeply. He carried memories of home carefully inside himself. The mountains, the rivers, his grandmother's stories, and the frozen grave beside the trail. Those memories had become sacred to him. One afternoon, Atsi sat beside the river with his friend Galilahi. The two boys had survived the march together. Now they often worked side by side, helping families build fences and cabins. Galilahi stared across the water quietly before speaking. "Sometimes I cannot remember my mother's voice anymore." The words hit Atsi hard, because he understood exactly what his friend meant. The longer they stayed away from Georgia, the more certain memories faded. Faces became less clear, voices became distant. Even smells and sounds from childhood slowly disappeared. That frightened many Cherokee survivors more than death itself. Forgetting felt dangerous, because forgetting meant losing part of who they were. That evening, Atsi visited an elder who often gathered children for storytelling. The old man spoke slowly beside the fire, while younger Cherokee listened carefully. He told stories about ancestors who survived wars, starvation, and hardship long before the Americans arrived. Then he looked directly at the children. "Our people survive because we remember." Atsi felt those words deeply, more than ever before. Meanwhile, changes were spreading quickly across native lands. The United States government continued pushing westward expansion. New settlers crossed native territories constantly. More tribes faced removal. More treaties were broken, and conflicts across the American West continued growing. News traveled slowly into Indian territory, but stories still arrived. Stories about the Choctaw Nation, the Creek Nation, the Seminole people fighting in Florida, and Plains tribes struggling against soldiers farther west. Many Cherokee survivors realized something painful. The Trail of Tears was not only happening to them. Native nations across America were suffering similar losses. One day, missionaries opened a school near Atsi's community. Some Cherokee families supported education strongly. Others worried deeply. The school taught English reading and writing, American history, Christian teachings, and farming methods encouraged by government officials. Atsi's father believed learning English could help Cherokee children survive in the changing world. But his mother feared something else. She feared Cherokee identity would slowly disappear. Before Atsi attended the school for the first time, she held his shoulders tightly. "You learn what you must," she said softly, "but never forget your own people." Inside the classroom, Atsi noticed changes immediately. Students were encouraged to speak English constantly. Some teachers acted respectfully toward Cherokee children. Others treated native traditions as unimportant or backward. Atsi stayed quiet most days, but he watched everything carefully. He understood the world around him was changing fast, and survival now required more than strength. It required memory, wisdom, and adaptability. As Atsi grew older, he became known as a hard worker in the community. He helped elders repair homes, he hunted with older Cherokee men, and he listened carefully whenever survivors spoke about the old homeland. One winter night, an elderly woman visited their cabin during a snowstorm. She had also survived the Trail of Tears. As the fire crackled beside them, she spoke about the journey softly, about children dying beside roads, about mothers burying babies in frozen ground, about soldiers forcing exhausted families forward. Then she looked directly at Atsi. "Young people must tell this story someday," she whispered, "or the world will pretend it never happened." Those words stayed with him for years, because Atsi slowly realized something important. The government wanted land, but over time, powerful people also wanted control over history itself. If future generations forgot the suffering, then nobody would be held accountable. That frightened him deeply. As the years passed, Atsi began helping younger children learn Cherokee songs and stories. Sometimes he repeated the same song his grandmother whispered beside the trail before she died. Children listened quietly around small fires, while elders nodded with approval. These moments mattered greatly, because Cherokee culture survived through memory passed from one generation to another. And despite everything, the culture was still alive. One spring morning, Atsi climbed a hill overlooking the settlement. Cabins stood below him. Smoke rose from chimneys. Children laughed nearby. Women carried water from the river. For the first time in many years, he saw signs of healing. Not complete healing, that would never fully happen, but survival. The Cherokee people were still standing. And suddenly, Atsi understood something his grandmother tried teaching him long ago. The government could remove people from land. It could destroy homes. It could even take lives. But as long as the Cherokee remembered who they were, they could never truly be erased. By the mid-1840s, Indian territory no longer looked like the broken refugee camps Atsi first arrived in as a child. Cherokee families had rebuilt farms. Roads connected settlements. Schools and churches stood across the land. The Cherokee nation even rebuilt its government and courts again. From the outside, life appeared calmer. But underneath that calm, deep pain still existed. Every family carried memories from the Trail of Tears, and those memories shaped an entire generation. Atsi was now a young adult, tall, quiet, and thoughtful. People respected him because he worked hard and listened more than he spoke. He helped build homes for widows who lost husbands during removal. He hunted for elderly families unable to gather food themselves. And he often sat beside elders for hours, listening to stories about the old homeland. The older survivors were aging now. Many feared dying before younger people fully understood what had happened. One elder named Tsula often called Atsi to his cabin late at night. The old man survived the death march after losing 3 children during the journey. Sometimes he stared silently into the fire before speaking. Then the memories came slowly. The muddy roads, the freezing rivers, the sound of crying children in the dark. Atsi listened carefully every time, because he understood something important now. The stories themselves were becoming sacred. If survivors died without sharing them, pieces of Cherokee history would disappear forever. Meanwhile, pressure from the United States government continued growing in different ways. Even though the Cherokee Nation governed itself inside Indian territory, American officials still interfered often. Agents monitored native communities constantly. Missionaries pushed Cherokee families toward American culture, and schools increasingly encouraged English over Cherokee language. Atsi noticed younger children speaking Cherokee less often than before. That worried him deeply. One afternoon, he heard 2 Cherokee boys laughing at an elder who struggled speaking English. The moment disturbed him badly. Later that evening, he gathered the boys beside the river. Then he told them about his grandmother, about the frozen grave left behind during removal, about the Cherokee songs whispered quietly beside campfires so soldiers would not hear. The boys became silent. "You carry those voices now," Atsi told them. "If you forget the language, you forget them too." The conversation spread quietly through the community afterward. More families began teaching Cherokee traditions at home carefully. Not only stories, but songs, ceremonies, and prayers passed down through generations. For many survivors, protecting culture became another form of resistance. Then, in 1846, political conflict inside the Cherokee Nation exploded again. The anger left behind after the Treaty of New Echota never fully disappeared. Some Cherokee still supported the treaty faction. Others still blamed them for removal and death. Violence and distrust continued poisoning relationships across communities. Leaders struggled desperately to keep the nation united. At one council gathering, Atsi watched older men argue loudly for hours. Some accused others of betrayal. Others warned division would destroy the Cherokee Nation completely. Atsi realized something painful while watching them. The Trail of Tears had not only taken lives, it had damaged trust itself. And rebuilding trust was far harder than rebuilding houses. Around this time, news from the rest of America also brought fear. The United States was expanding westward rapidly. War with Mexico began in 1846. Settlers pushed farther across native lands, and new territories opened constantly. Many Cherokee worried another removal could someday happen again, because promises from the American government rarely lasted. One night, Atsi's father spoke openly about that fear for the first time. "We rebuilt once," he said quietly, "but never believe powerful men cannot try taking more." Those words stayed with Atsi long afterward. His father had changed greatly since Georgia. The strong, cheerful man from Atsi's childhood now carried permanent sadness in his eyes. Years of grief had aged him early. Still, he continued working every day for his family. That quiet determination inspired Atsi deeply. Then tragedy struck again. During the winter of 1847, sickness spread through several Cherokee settlements. Fever moved rapidly from cabin to cabin. Children became weak. Elders struggled breathing. Atsi's father became ill after helping sick neighbors for days. At first, the family believed he would recover, but the fever worsened quickly. One cold night, Atsi sat beside him while snow fell outside. His father struggled, speaking through exhaustion. Finally, he placed a weak hand on Atsi's shoulder. "You survived the trail," he whispered. "Now protect the people who remain." Before sunrise, he died. The loss crushed Atsi completely. His father had survived removal, starvation, freezing weather, and endless walking, only to die years later in unfamiliar land far from home. During the burial, Atsi stood silently beside the grave while wind moved through dry grass. He suddenly understood what many survivors already felt. The Trail of Tears never truly ended. Its pain continued through years afterward, through sickness, grief, and memories carried by survivors every single day. After his father's death, Atsi became the main provider for the family. He worked longer hours, protected his mother and sister, and continued helping preserve Cherokee traditions inside the community. People increasingly trusted him for guidance, despite his young age. One evening, Galilei visited him beside the fire. The two friends had grown into men together after surviving the march as boys. Galilei stared into the flames before asking quietly, "Do you ever hate them?" Atsi remained silent for a long moment. Then he answered honestly, "Sometimes." The fire cracked softly between them. "But if hatred becomes all we carry, then they take what is left of us too." Galilei nodded slowly, because both men understood something difficult. Survival required more than remembering pain. It also required protecting humanity itself. As years continued passing, younger Cherokee children gathered around Atsi more often for stories. He taught them songs from Georgia, words from the Cherokee language, and memories from before removal. Sometimes the children asked questions about the old homeland. What did the mountains look like? Were the rivers really that big? Atsi answered every question carefully, because now he carried responsibility his grandmother once carried before him, keeping memory alive. And somewhere deep inside, he knew the future of the Cherokee people depended on it. By the early 1850s, many children inside the Cherokee Nation had never seen the homeland their parents still mourned every day. They were born in Indian territory. They played beside different rivers, walked different roads, and grew up hearing stories about a place they could barely imagine. To them, Georgia sounded almost like another world. But to survivors like Atsi, the memories remained alive. Every mountain path, every stream, every grave left behind during the Trail of Tears, nothing was forgotten. Now in his 20s, Atsi had become one of the respected young men in his community. People often came to him for help or advice, not because he was wealthy or powerful, but because he listened carefully and carried the wisdom of survivors inside him. His mother sometimes watched him quietly beside the fire at night. "You sound like your grandmother now," she once told him softly. The words touched him deeply, because he still remembered her final whisper beside the frozen trail. "Do not let them erase us." Those words had guided his entire life. Meanwhile, America continued changing rapidly around native nations. Railroads expanded farther west. New settlers crossed native lands constantly. Gold discoveries pushed thousands into tribal territories. And conflicts between the United States government and native tribes continued spreading across the West. Cherokee leaders watched these developments carefully, because they understood something most Americans ignored. Expansion usually came with broken promises, again and again. One spring, travelers passing through the Cherokee Nation brought stories about tribes farther west facing military violence. Some communities were already being pressured into smaller lands. Others had lost hunting grounds completely. The old pattern continued. Treaty, promise, land seizure, conflict. Atsi listened silently while elders discussed the news around council fires. Then one older survivor spoke quietly. "It never ends when people hunger for land." Nobody argued with him. Even after removal, the Cherokee Nation still faced pressure from outsiders who wanted control over native lives. But despite the fear and grief carried by survivors, Cherokee culture endured strongly. Traditional ceremonies continued. Families still gathered for storytelling. Children learned Cherokee songs beside evening fires. And community bonds slowly strengthened again over time. Atsi became deeply involved in teaching younger generations. Sometimes he gathered children beneath large trees near the river and told them stories about the old homeland. Not only painful stories, beautiful ones too. He described green mountains covered in mist during morning sunlight, birds singing near rivers, the smell of wood smoke drifting from Cherokee cabins. The children listened closely every time. For them, these stories built connection to ancestors they never met. One young boy once asked him quietly, "If Georgia was so beautiful, why did they take it?" The question froze the air around them. Atsi looked at the children sitting in silence nearby. Then he answered honestly, because some people wanted more than they already had. The children lowered their eyes quietly. Even at a young age, they understood greed. As years passed, Atsi also noticed something encouraging. Many Cherokee survivors refused letting grief destroy them completely. Families celebrated births, young people married, music returned to community gatherings, and laughter slowly returned too. Not because the pain disappeared, but because survival demanded hope as well. One autumn evening, the Cherokee Nation held a large gathering celebrating harvest season. Fires burned across the settlement. Families shared food. Children ran through the grass laughing, and elders sang old songs together beneath the night sky. Atsi stood quietly watching everything. For a moment, memories overwhelmed him. He remembered the freezing roads of the Trail of Tears, the crying, the sickness, his grandmother's grave left behind in snow. And suddenly he realized something powerful. The people around him were living proof that the Cherokee Nation survived. The government tried removing them from their homeland, but it failed to destroy who they were. That truth filled him with emotions stronger than anger: pride. Later that night, Atsi sat beside the fire with Galilahi once again. The two boys who survived the march together were now grown men, carrying scars invisible to most people. Galilahi stared into the flames quietly. "Do you think America will ever tell the truth about what happened to us?" Atsi thought carefully before answering. "Maybe not soon." The fire cracked softly between them. "But someday people will listen." Years later, his words would prove true, because Cherokee survivors continued telling their stories generation after generation. Parents taught children, grandparents taught grandchildren. Memories passed carefully through families like sacred treasures. And eventually, more Americans slowly began learning the truth about the Trail of Tears. Not as a simple migration, not as peaceful relocation, but as a forced removal that caused enormous suffering and death. For carrying memory forward. Before his mother died many years later, she asked him for one promise: "Keep telling them who we are." Atsi held her hand gently and nodded. "I will." And he kept that promise for the rest of his life. Children, the story survived because survivors refused silence. Atsi understood this deeply during his later years. He no longer viewed himself simply as a boy who survived the death march. He had become something else, a witness, someone responsible. Gathered around him long after his hair turned gray. He told them about Georgia, about Cherokee traditions, about the winter march west, and about the people who never made it there. Sometimes listeners cried quietly hearing the stories. Other times they sat in complete silence. But nobody forgot. That became Atsi's greatest victory. Because the Trail of Tears was not only about suffering, it was also about survival. The survival of language, culture, memory, and identity. The United States government removed the Cherokee people from their homeland in 1838. Thousands died during the journey west. Families were broken forever. But even after all that pain, the Cherokee nation survived. And so did the voices of those who walked the trail. Today, descendants of survivors still honor those memories. Historic routes are marked across several states. Ceremonies remember the dead, and Cherokee communities continue protecting their language, traditions, and sovereignty. The world still remembers the Trail of Tears because survivors like Atsi refused to let history disappear. And as long as those stories continue being told, the people lost along the trail are never truly gone.